welcome. I'm your host, Henri Arslanian, and welcome to this episode of the Future of Money podcast. The Future of Money podcast, where I want to say a big thank you to all of you, to the 500,000 of you who follow my content each week. This podcast, The Future of Money, is ranked now in the top 5% of all podcasts globally on Spotify. Really thank you to the thousands of you from over 160 countries globally who are tuning in each week to learn about the future of money and all the latest developments in the world of crypto. Today we have a very interesting episode and a topic that I've been asked a lot, and we will go into more in depth in a second. But we're joined today with Hugo Philion, who's the co-founder of Flare Networks. Hugo, great to have you with us on the show today.
Hey, Henry. Thank you for having me.
One interesting fact about Hugo, by the way, I mean, he studied, actually did a master's in machine learning at university, but he really put himself through university by doing sports betting arbitrage. Those are the good old days of arbitrage trading. And Hugo, I'm happy that paid, one good thing with that, it paid for your part of university, or at least paid you the beer money throughout university.
Absolutely. It was a fun time. I wouldn't say I put myself through university with that, but it certainly gave me some extra income.
Yeah, exactly. It gives the good old arbitrage. I'm a massive fan of those strategies. Well, Hugo, today we know we've gotten a lot of requests over the last couple of months from a lot of my user base on basically how the on-chain world is working with the off-chain world. How can you get some of these oracles in place? How can we get data in place? Today, my goal is really to do a deep dive really on the future of decentralized data. How can we have a lot of, as the DeFi ecosystem evolves, how can we have DeFi connect and interact with some off-chain data that come in, also on-chain as well, to really enable and empower the world of DeFi. But before we do that, do you mind sharing with our audience a bit more about yourself, your background, and what is Flare? What is Flare Networks, and what are you guys building?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So Flare is a layer 1 EVM, so layer 1 blockchain, runs the Ethereum Virtual Machine. It's completely unique in that it's the only blockchain that has enshrined into the blockchain itself data acquisition protocols. So as part of running a validator, you also have to run you also have to interact with the data acquisition protocols. And there's two data acquisition protocols that capture three types of data. So the first is time series data. So we call that the Flare time series oracle, and time series data in our industry predominantly is prices, because that's what people are interested in. Could be other things, could be things like shipping rates, freight rates, carbon indexes, any type of data that moves, very quickly, for which you can't, a validator, or the set of validators will not get the same view of the data at any particular instant. So that's what the Flare time series oracle is for. And we've just upgraded it to the Flare FTSO v2. And the FTSO v2 moves the system from being able to handle 15 prices every 3 minutes to 1,000 prices every block. So it's quite a radical change for the system, makes it a lot bigger, a lot more scalable, and a lot more data. And that is, the data on Flare is provided essentially for free. Although where there need to be subscription fees for types of data feeds, there is a payment module for that. So, if a particular type of data is required, but it incurs a very heavy cost for the validators to go and get it, there is a payment module that allows for that to happen. So that's the first type of data protocol we have on Flare. Then the second type is for essentially deterministic data. Data that a validator is going to get a view, basically be able to come to consensus with the other validators over something that has happened. So they're all going to get the same answer, or they all should get the same answer. And we call that the Flare data connector. And we're applying that to two types of data. Web3 data to start with, predominantly. So things like being able to prove something from Bitcoin, from Ethereum, from Cosmos, from Polkadot, from Ton, large networks where being able to retrieve the state and do something with that in a smart contract is interesting. And then Web2 data, so being able to connect to APIs in Web2. And one of the places we're actively researching there is, what can we prove about AI models? Can we prove AI model outputs? I mean, in fact, we know we can basically prove AI model outputs. for certain types of AI model, not every type of AI model. And that's an area of continued discussion. But we could do other things like prove that someone's tweet has more than 500 likes. We can prove, something from weather.com. We can prove basically anything. We could prove things from the Federal Reserve, things from the data series that are interesting around things like inflation and that kind of stuff.
So if you don't mind, Hugo, can I just double click on one of the items you mentioned here? So I think on the first one, the time series, I think the users can understand quite easily. Also, when you talk about deterministic, the data they're capturing on the Web3 side, I think a lot of it's on chain network. I can get that. On the Web2 side, though, how do you make sure that you're able to a test of the quality of the data? So you mentioned, let's say, verifying that a certain tweet has more than 500 tweets or likes, for example, or whatever you mentioned on that perspective. How are you able to measure that, and how do you make sure that there's accuracy in that verification process as well that the users can trust?
So the way Flare's data oracles work is that ultimately every validator, and currently we have around 100 validators. Then we have 100, but we can extend that, but we don't think it's sensible to extend it that dramatically. But each validator contributes to every single piece of data. It's not like other Oracle systems where for a particularly popular series or a particular popular piece of information, that I might have a number, a reasonable number of validators. But for a less popular thing, I might have only one, operator that is attesting to that. That's not how it works on Flare. On Flare, every validator must contribute to every piece of data. So in the pricing, essentially, if you're not contributing to every piece of data, you are losing quite large amounts of money. On the state attestation or Web2 attestation, essentially it uses the consensus of the network. So if we have less than, if we have less than the majority of the nodes attesting that data, then it doesn't come to consensus on the network.
Interesting. And when you look at this, let's think 5 or 10 years down the line, right? Where do you think the biggest opportunity will be for a network like Flare and interaction it's going to have, not only with the Web3 ecosystem, but also in its interaction with the legacy or whatever Web2 ecosystem?
I don't think Web2 will ever really become fully legacy, because I think there are certain things blockchains are good for. At the moment, we don't know how to speed them up to the point where you could run Web2 like services on fully on a blockchain. So I think there's always going to be a lot of centralized aspects of compute, and I think we see that more and more actually. But fast forward 10 years, I think DeFi will have expanded dramatically. It is an incredibly valuable set of protocols. It does allow you to do really interesting things. It allows people to take risks that they, take risks or hedge off risks that they simply cannot do really, in TradFi. So I think that's going to continue to develop. I think it's, we're seeing all these restaking protocols and things like that. Sometimes I wonder whether perhaps people don't necessarily take the lessons of the past when it comes to like stacking, security, and economic incentives, kind of in a tower, whereby if you pull a brick out at the bottom, some aspect comes tumbling down. But that said, I think there has to be a degree of experimentation to find what works, right? That's kind of what the industry is about. So in 10 years, I think, DeFi is very much still here. I'd like to say that gaming has made an impact, because I do think that the aspect of being able to own your in-game assets and do things with them is interesting. And I think, I think I'm a semi-believer in the metaverse kind of ideas, simply because I think more people will be increasingly online, and therefore there'll be more digital assets, not just like tokens that are distributed, but the in-game assets. And then for me, I think the biggest area, the area that is the area that I think could potentially eclipse the financial aspects of blockchain would be what I prefer to call machine learning, but everyone else calls artificial intelligence.
What do you think could be how do you think machine learning could eclipse, let's say, the whole crypto space, and especially in a world like yours where you need to verify data? I know you alluded earlier to how you're able to like predict AI models, but how can Flare Network and play a role in verifying, let's say, machine learning?
Yeah, so we wouldn't be predicting AI models. We would be attesting the results of AI models.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
And that yeah, that's very that's an interesting area because let's say, for instance, you have an advertising platform on a particular app that runs on your telephone. And let's say you've just figured out that you'd like to monetize that advertising platform by integrating it with a pre-existing token, and your monetization relies around ad revenue, people buying ads, people posting ads, and that kind of stuff. Well, you can monitor those because of the way the structure works, and the way there's APIs involved in that particular app. You can monitor the performance of those ads in real time, process them through machine learning, test that on chain, and give very interesting insights, and probably build quite interesting auction-like products for advertising on that platform. We'll see how that unfolds, but I think there's some, that's just like one tiny use case of something that actually exists today. But there's a huge number of other areas within machine learning, which I think blockchain makes better. Specifically, I'm less interested in things like training a model, because I think that training models, people trying to do networks, decentralized networks for training models, I think if one looks at the resource intensity of training a model, it's very energy intensive, and I think it's very deeply undesirable for humanity for us to make the training of AI models more energy intensive by essentially not running the model training in a super optimized data center. This is where Google and Amazon and that lot, and the large machine learning companies have really, got their stuff together on this one. I think trying to decentralize it by having everyone's device training a model at home, I think is super inefficient. So I'm not a believer in that one. I'm not hugely a believer in things like data marketplaces, because I think like data is very like our particular belief on where the intersection of blockchain and AI lies is that data absolutely has to be kept private, and that the amount of data that you could actually put into a marketplace globally is very limited, because one, most interesting data is either private or sensitive to a business. So if I hold really interesting data, I probably don't want to sell it. If I hold interesting data, there's a good chance it has privacy aspects. So our belief for how blockchain and crypto intersects, blockchain and AI intersects, is that it intersects more in allowing models and people who are working in the AI industry to come together to do collective machine learning rather than centralized machine learning. But we can get onto
Yeah,
that
I
in
mean,
more detail.
what do you think could be? I mean, it's an interesting point of you mean you got the data marketplace, and I get and I understand your argument around privacy, but I would also argue that there's a lot of data that people would be happy to give out. Like I don't know if I go jogging every day and there's data on my Garmin watch, and that could be interesting. I'm a mountain climber, or I think there's some data that could be interesting or valuable, but probably not. I don't care about the privacy aspect of it, where there could be a marketplace. But where do you think is the big opportunity when you look at the future of AI and blockchain? You mentioned machine learning and crypto coming in. What do you think is the big catalyst where we're going to have a 1+1 = 3 relationship between when it comes to machine learning and blockchain?
Yeah, well, of course, there's data that people will be happy to give out. Frankly, I'd be a little less happy given things to tell people where I am on a daily basis. But that's just my own particular bent. But where do I think there's huge upside? Defense. I think you have defense networks that need to be able to, apply machine learning, but they don't want to send information across borders. So things like NATO, they don't want their information to cross borders, but you can do collective machine learning where you can get inferences from each of the nodes in the network. The same applies very, very substantially in healthcare. You really don't want to be propagating healthcare information, patient information across, different hospital groups, across different national borders. It's illegal in most cases anyway. So again, I think being able to have, a model in a location and that model contribute to a larger model is very interesting, and doing so with privacy. And whilst the model parameters are kept private, this is one of the problems with existing versions of distributed machine learning, which is that the models aren't private, which means I can make inference. The central node can actually infer what the underlying data is from the inferences from the data sent through the network. That's highly problematic. So I think blockchain can solve, or at least aspects of blockchain can solve that, and I think it's very interesting.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. One other question that I want to ask you is about when you talk about these 100 validators that the Flare network has. How do you guys choose those validators, and how do you ensure that they're accurate?
Yeah, we don't. So the community chooses them by staking their tokens to the validators. And so then there's essentially, if they don't coalesce to an answer, then if the network consensus is here, but your price is over here, then you're not getting a reward, which means that people will stop staking to you. And this is the same with all consensus aspects, right? Which is, ultimately, if you have a weight of validators giving one particular answer, then the network will go in that direction. And obviously, you could have a situation where all of the vast majority of the validators are malicious, but that's the same with every network. And the reality is that doesn't really happen. We then do have a secondary aspect within the protocol that allows for rogue or duplicated validators. So if someone's running the same price model, if their answers are identical or very, very similar, they can be kicked out through a governance process.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's key. I think you're right. There's the risk of from a 51% attack on proof of work consensus mechanisms to others. I mean, there's always that risk that is there, and it's interesting I think, from that perspective.
It's definitely a risk, but using a blockchain to handle data gives you a robustness that you don't get from a non-blockchain network. It's having a large number of nodes, and a large number of nodes dealing with every price or every type of attestation is very useful.
But when it comes to, let's say, like decentralized data, what you're referring to, what do you think will be the tipping point that we'll have a preference, like the society more at large in the business world, to be using decentralized data compared to the centralized sources we have? Because, you can argue there could be some drawbacks from speed being a good example. There's a group of malicious actors that can do a 51% attack equivalent, but at the same time, yes, in a centralized world, that one player providing the data could also do a mistake or be in bad intention. What do you think will be the tipping point that would make us go from centralized data to decentralized data?
Well, I think having I'm not sure that every use case requires full decentralization, but DeFi absolutely should be decentralized. Yeah. The data within DeFi should be decentralized. Otherwise, it's not really DeFi. It's just CeFi with, pretending to be DeFi. I think also you've seen with the existing oracles, there have been, a non-negligible number of instances where updates have been missed, or, price updates have been missed. There have been bad price updates, like substantially bad price updates that have caused large amounts of bad debt in protocols. The quality of decentralization, to say the least, if there is decentralization, is as soon as you get out of say the top 10 prices, really falls off, dramatically with most of the other oracles. And, personally, I believe if you're not running this on a blockchain with stake, with the validators involved, with all of the validators having to be involved, that you can't really claim any meaningful decentralization. It's just a distributed network, which is fine. But trying to claim decentralization is sort of not sensible. And to more concretely answer your question, what is the tipping point? Well, every time I talk to a developer, they really are unhappy with the existing paradigm, and they really do want a decentralized oracle, because if they're going to put in 1 to 5 years of work on a project, they don't want that work to be undermined by an external party that can damage their business at any time.
Understood. I mean, I agree with you that there's definite need of decentralized data in the broader decentralized DeFi world, and I think you're right. I mean, they go hand in hand, right, from that perspective. But when it comes to let's call it within the DeFi world, what are the features or applications or use cases that you believe that decentralized data, including the Flare network, has the most value? Is it on DeFi exchanges? Is it other types of layer 2 bridges?
I mean,
what are you seeing in those domains?
I think so. I mean, we're obviously interested in bridges, and I can come on to a protocol we're building called F-Assets, which is a trustless bridge for non smart contract tokens like Bitcoin. But we're interested in bridges, lending protocols, particularly the newer DEXs, which do need data. Obviously the early DEXs, the Uniswaps of this world don't need a data source. I think real world asset protocols absolutely need data sources. On-chain attestation, proof of reserves, again, that needs data sources, and it needs those data sources to be verified. You can verify it using a lawyer, you can verify it using an accountant, or you can verify it using a weight of stake.
Yeah.
Right? We have, decentralization is just a different way to do things that we have done, many times before, without vesting excessive power in one particular person or company.
And I think it's a very interesting point you make, and something that I reflect a lot about it. And I talk about this in my last book as well, because if you think about it in the traditional world, we have, like, I used to be a partner at a big four, right? Where you come and you come and supposed to build this trust to provide to the business world and society at large that these firms are here to be the arbitrators, if you want, and try to provide some level of trust. Whereas in DeFi world, especially things you mentioned, like lending protocols, DEXs, but also RWA, I mean, real world assets, for sure, this is going to be needed. And the beauty, I think, in what you mentioned and the broader crypto, but also DeFi, and also what you guys are doing with Flare, is we're able to have these validators that do the same job that these big four or others are doing. In a way, like we have this with other consensus mechanisms when it comes to reaching consensus of a certain layer 1, for example. But I think it's very interesting, the angle you guys are bringing in from that perspective.
Well, the big four, they have their reputation at stake, right? When it comes to blockchain, the only thing you can really have at stake is stake. One of my biggest problem with existing oracles is that basically, they don't really, although they're increasingly having stake applied to them, on the whole, they don't really operate with stake.
Interesting. And I don't know if it's a maybe too direct question, but I mean, we've had many other protocols over the years on the show, and obviously one of the big ones that comes to mind is Chainlink. I mean, I'm sure you've been asked this question, I'm sure multiple times in the past, but there's been obviously a lot of other protocols who try to bridge this gap between the Web2, Web3, or off-chain and crypto world. How does, let's say, Flare Network compare with other protocols, including Chainlink?
I think if I remember correctly, Chainlink has somewhere around 20 to 21 nodes, 22 nodes in their sort of system. Obviously, 22 nodes is I guess a certain number. I think they have 8% of the Link token staked. That's very, very low. That's my sort of recollection of what they're doing. So, Flare has about 80% of its tokens staked, which means you've got a lot more value there. Additionally, Chainlink's not really operating on a blockchain. It operates on a network, but not a blockchain. And it then prints its prices onto other chains. With Flare, because we've optimized the system, it means that we can make the ability for us to get our prices onto the Flare chain very, very much more robust. Whereas, with an external oracle, when there's very, very high network traffic and the price of a transaction increases very substantially, there's not necessarily a guarantee that you're going to get an update in time. So there's a lot of games that can be played once you start, going down that avenue.
Interesting. And then one other question, Hugo. There's a lot of data in the TradFi world and in the Web2 world obviously has caused tremendous scandals in the last couple of years. How data is being used, how it's been stolen, how it's been used by malicious actors. When you look again a couple of years down the line, what could go wrong with decentralized data, and what can we learn from the mistakes that happened in the Web2 world and how data was handled, and how do you think we can address these in a Web3 world?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the blockchain addresses that. I'm not, at least when I think about our data protocols, we are, essentially broadly getting data that is either public or privately owned and paid for. One could say, for instance, get a whole bunch of leaked data and attest that to a chain. But that's not sort of something all of our validators are going to do, right? So, that's a much more centralized thing. So, anyone could, get maliciously obtained data and use it in some capacity. But you're not going to get 100 of our validators going to get that maliciously leaked data and put that on. There's no reason why they would. But I'm not certain that. The blockchain, necessarily helps, other than, it does have an element of security that the traditional password database centralized mechanisms, perhaps miss out on to some extent, mostly because a lot of people have very weak passwords.
Interesting. Yeah. So necessarily that we're not able to solve the problems that we have just by moving to Web3 ecosystem.
No.
So one other thing is, obviously the world of DeFi. One element that I find very interesting is, there was recently, at the time of recording this, it was recently announced that there is now the first native stablecoin on the Flare network, USDX, which was done with Hex Trust and others with whom we had on the show in the past. Can you share with us what is USDX? What is the purpose of it, and how do you see it being different from other stable coins that you've seen in the market?
So Hex Trust announced USDX, and at the same time, an affiliated protocol to Hex Trust called Clearpool announced the first real-world asset protocol on Flare, which is the Clearpool sort of treasury vaults. And so USDX is very similar to other stablecoins in that, a person wishing to mint USDX onto the chain will send dollars to the custodian, which in this case is Hex Trust. Hex Trust will then mint the USDX for the user. This is so far so similar to Tether or Circle or any of that. The difference is that Clearpool then allows you to take that USDX, put it in Clearpool, at which point Hex Trust will then use the dollars that were deposited against that USDX and buy US treasuries, 1 to 3 month treasury bills with them. So it means that you can get the yield on your USDX stablecoin, but at the same time, and this is where it's really interesting for us building bridges, that Clearpool vault will emit a token, a claim token called USDX. So this is a claim token that allows you to go back to the vault at a future point in time to get your USDX plus the yield that has been accrued in treasuries. and CUSDX for us building a protocol called FAssets, which is an over collateralized bridge for tokens like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, Litecoin, XRP, large value non-smart contract token, not non-smart contract tokens. And that's the reason why we're going for the collateralized route is that multi-sigs, multi-sigs are essentially what you can do with things like Bitcoin, with different variants of it. But all sort of boils down to relatively small set of people with not that much at stake. Whereas we always liked the idea of basically making a bridge that was over collateralized in stables and in Flare. So, you have to put up like 1.1 in stables, 1.1x in stables, and like between 1 and 1.5 in Flare in order to have the rights to bridge over. But of course, if you have a yielding stable, putting up that collateral becomes much less difficult. And of course, Flare has its own native yield. So by becoming an operator on Flare's over collateralized bridges for Bitcoin, you earn your treasury yield on your stables. You earn the staking yield on the Flare, and you also get the bridge fees, so the minting fees and the redemption fees, and you get trail fees for the use of those tokens on the Flare network. And so we think this is about as good a bridge as you can come up with, about as secure a bridge as you can come up with. And again, using our decentralized data protocols, the bridge operates that way by proving that something has happened on Bitcoin, by proving that by using the FTSO to assess whether there's sufficient collateral in each vault, using the Bitcoin CUSDX price, those kind of things, and that's a big development for us. So having the Hex stablecoin and the Clearpool vaults on Flare is fantastic, not just for us building the bridge, but also for other DeFi protocols.
It's very interesting from that perspective because there's a bit of irony as well in here, because obviously we're building an entire decentralized protocol, but we still need a custodian to hold the treasuries. Ironically, even though your protocol, we're providing trust on this side, but you're still in need of being able to have a custodian that's holding the treasury. So I think it's a bit ironic, but it is what it is, I guess.
So we solve our bridge issue. We solve the centralization aspect of our bridge issue by having both at least 1x in stables and at least 1.1 to 1.5x in the Flare token. So you've got a decentralized token, and you've got a decentralized token which is volatile, and you've got a centralized token which is non-volatile. And so that mix of collateral is kind of ideal for our purposes.
And this could be used obviously on the Flare network, but and sorry if it's a stupid question, but can it be used in other layer ones as well?
I believe that Hex are interested in or maybe even have issued it on other layer ones, but I think also in the future there can be bridges from Flare to other blockchains. So feasibly a wrapped version could be moved over.
It's very interesting. I think from that perspective, providing yield is basically what a lot of the centralized now stablecoin providers are keeping as revenue and P&L.
Absolutely.
There's a way of distributing it away, and Clearpool is very interesting on its own as well. But it's a different conversation on that perspective. It's very interesting, Hugo, I guess. And as we finish off the discussion, is one thing I'm very keen to. You mentioned at the beginning of the conversation the whole gaming world, right? And it's something we discussed on the show previously a lot about the role that gaming can play in the development of the next billion users in crypto, for example. And you mentioned before, there's a lot of demand of having digital assets, not crypto, but let's say people have skins of certain weapons and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
When you see the combination of gaming and crypto come together, do you think that could be one of the big drivers in the adoption of DeFi, or you think it's going to be more and having decentralized data as well, or you believe a lot of this gaming ecosystem for longer than expected will remain in this Web2 world? and that we're going to solve the issue of digital asset ownership via different mechanisms, like with centralized agencies, for example?
I think it depends how the world pans out. I always look at YouTube as like a sort of example here, right? YouTube kind of allowed content creators to monetize stuff in a way that they'd never been able to do before. So, if you wanted to create content, you had to go get a job at the BBC or CBS or whatever it is. Whereas YouTube kind of created basically this whole new class of people, this whole new type of work for people. And I wonder if an increasingly autonomous world means that people will have to have other ways to earn money, such as, accumulating skins in video games for which there's a market. At which point, it being sort of blockchain existing, at the time when that might be a thing, means that it's far more likely to be built on blockchain because it's a fantastic substrate for essentially commerce between individuals that neither know nor trust each other.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, I think this whole field will have a lot to be done over the next couple of months and years. Hugo, as we close off the show, I'm going to go with a 5 round of question. We're going to go quickly to them, and I need 1 or 2 word answers from your side, and as we move forward. Are you ready?
Try to be.
Let's do it. So Hugo, what do you do when you're not working, when you're not involved with Flare Networks, on your free time?
Cook.
Cook, really?
Cook. Go to the gym. Do kettlebell. And read.
Amazing. What's your favorite type of cuisine to cook?
I think at the moment, barbecue.
Oh, here you go. Well, Hugo, you spend a lot of time in Dubai. What's your favorite thing about Dubai?
It's always sunny, and it has a fantastic ruler.
Fantastic ruler. Here we go. What is the biggest misconception people have about Dubai?
That it's just flashy. That it has no substance. They should come and meet the actual Emiratis rather than the expats.
Yeah, I agree. If you're not in the crypto space, what other industry would you be in?
Well, I was in finance before, but I think I'd be much more interested in AI these days.
What is the one innovation in AI that has impressed you the most in the last 12 months?
I mean, obviously GPT models, right? They're very interesting.
And what do you think the one thing people get the most wrong about not only AI, but specifically about GPT models?
I think they think that the information being output to them comes from somewhere, meaning that it's being called from a database. It isn't. It's being procedurally generated,
which is amazing from that perspective, indeed. If you could go back to university today, Hugo, what would you study that you wish you had studied back in the day?
Physics.
Interesting. Why is that?
It's a fantastic subject.
Yeah. What is your favorite AI or machine learning movie that you've seen in the last couple of years?
I think I've only seen one, and it's the one by the guy that made Train Spotting. Is it Train Spotting? I'm not sure, but
we'll come back to it.
Ex Machina.
There you go.
Ex Machina.
There you go. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Interesting. So, what is surprising you the most about the crypto industry? What is the one thing that surprises you the most about the crypto industry?
The lack of knowledge that people have of what's actually happening, the amount of investment into protocols that people don't research or seem to know.
Yeah, very good, very good point. Right now, if you had a message to a university student that is interested in machine learning and AI and the intersection of crypto, what is the one piece of advice you would give to them?
Don't join one of the large centralized crypto AI companies.
Really? Why is that?
Because there's a fantastic thing to be done in decentralized AI.
Here we go. I love that you're promoting the decentralized AI world. I love it. And Hugo, as we at the start you mentioned that you're a big reader. What is the one book you recommend everybody to read that you found very interesting in the last couple of years?
Tough one. H.G. Wells, War of the World.
Wow, interesting. World of Worlds. Here we go. And to finish it off, this was Hugo, the co-founder of Flare Networks, Hugo Philion. Hugo, the typical question when anybody comes on my show, if you could have lunch or dinner with one person dead or alive, lunch or dinner with one person dead or alive, who would you have lunch with?
Alexander the Great.
Ooh, and why is that?
I think everyone knows about him. But he's so forgotten when, in context to say the Romans. But, we know so much about Caesar. There's so many movies about him. We know so much about, the Victorians, the Elizabethans, the Tudors, this kind of stuff. Alexander the Great's more of an enigma. There's less written about him, less seemingly known about him, but yet he sort of took over an entire landmass.
I love it. Hugo, how can people find out more or learn more about Flare Networks and yourself?
Flare.network is our website, at Flare Networks on Twitter. We also have Telegram and Discord. We have a very good docs page on our website. Yep. Otherwise, I'm at Hugo Philion on Twitter.
Amazing. Guys, thank you very much.
Although I should say X.
Right, exactly. Well, hopefully we'll have a decentralized version of that as well, but let's see how that goes. Guys, hope this was a useful show. We know we covered a lot of topics, but again, thank you for your interest in the podcast. Again, make sure to also check out our YouTube page where we have a lot of exclusive content as well, and where you can see the video version of this for those of you listening on the podcast, the video version of this interview. Thank you very much, everybody, and see you all soon for another episode of the Future Money Podcast. Thank you.